first of all, if I missed anything about you, you'd like to share a little bit more information about who you're representing, please include that. But we wanted to talk a little bit about priorities. I know that you probably went into this session with some priorities. So please share with us what those priorities were and whether or not you were successful in accomplishing what you set out to do this year in 2019 session.
So priorities, I would say my biggest one is education, and then seconded by human services with Medicaid funding, specifically in terms of how that affects so many of our constituents, and the whole issue of managed care and how that is or is not working for a lot of the people who, again, we represent. The third one that came up on our list, mental health funding for especially the children's mental health system. We did start a system to be put into place, but again, we really didn't identify where the dollars are going to come for funding that system. And so again, that's an area that we need to address. I think we actually made some progress on education funding because we saw increases for our K-12 system, although I would have liked it to have been more. The 2.06% is better than we've seen in past years. Community college funding, Regents funding, we are still woefully behind where we should be in terms of our funding for education. And that's an enormous concern going forward. I'm going to stop there and let others go ahead and speak, and then we'll come back to questions. But thank you.
Well, thank you for the question about priorities. My name is Dave Jacoby, and I do serve here in Coralville in the western part of Iowa City in Penn Township, and I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, Commerce, Economic Growth, and Natural Resources. And probably, the job, it's so cool to serve you in Des Moines, especially when you first pull up on Interstate 235. Every day I pull up and turn the corner and see that gold dome. I take my hands off the wheel just momentarily and go, this is so darn cool. And then put my hands back on the wheel and pull in. One of the things, probably the top thing is not as specific as you might want to hear, that I look forward to this session is going in with the hope and positive optimism, to be repetitiously redundant, is that we would work together and work on some common themes. And one of them was on tax policy. Now, I know whenever we talk about property taxes and rollback, the only thing that usually rolls back are people's eyes, and they try to stay awake. But I was hoping that we would do tax policy unlike the backwards attempts we've made the last few years. This summer, you will see a tax review committee, and I'm sure that Senator Bolcom will be serving on that too. But I hope that this summer we actually do tax review, and that's review of all tax credits and a review of all taxation policies in Iowa. I think we need to do that first before we move forward with any more tax policy, whether it's property taxes, income taxes, corporate income tax, or if we're starting to damage local governments by restricting their freedom to either tax or not tax constituents. On a very positive note, one thing that was near and dear to me was Logan's Law, and that's a law that passed both chambers and was signed by the governor after a young man, a 15-year-old from the Charles City area who died tragically in an accident on his ATV, and was a big hunter and fisherman. And what the law basically does is we're able to put someone's wishes that they're an organ donor on their hunting and fishing licenses, similar to what we have on your personal driving license. Now, it may seem like a little thing, but I'm sure a lot of people sitting here have sat around the dinner table, as I have with my girls and wife, and said, I want to be an organ donor. Well, it doesn't mean anything till you got it down in writing, and you need it in writing, and you never know when and if that may happen. Hopefully not to any of us, but Logan contributed his organs to 4 people who are now alive because of his and his parents' donation. So that's a positive thing that came out of the 2019 session. And thank you for being here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joe Bolk. I'm a member of the Iowa Senate, serving in my 21st year. Thank you to the task force for hosting today's forum. I serve on the Human Resource Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, the Commerce Committee, the Health and Human Services Budget Sub-Appropriation Committee, and I'm the ranking member on appropriations. I, like Senator Masher, priority-wise went to work hoping that we'd be able to improve funding for education, improve our healthcare safety net, and strengthen the Medicaid program, which has been kind of in a shambles since we privatized it. So those are two kind of big areas that I was interested in. There are a number of issues that affect seniors in Iowa that we made some progress on, passage of the CARE Act, which has been a top priority of AARP. And we also made progress implementing recommendations of a committee that was looking at guardianships and conservatorships and making the law a little bit more sensible and understandable to people. One of the other priorities that we have in the minority is fighting against things that are bad. And there was no shortage of bad ideas this session. So I wanted to give a little good news about things that we fought against that actually didn't advance. There was a constitutional amendment that was brought forward banning abortions in all cases, including rape and incest. We beat back a bill that would prohibit tenure at their state universities and community colleges. We stopped a bill that would eliminate the Department of Education and Iowa Public TV. We beat a bill allowing concealed weapons in places of worship, a bill to ban abortions before most women know they are pregnant. We beat a bill eliminating permits to actually carry a concealed weapon, and a bill to allow guns in schools. There were proposals to limit who got immunized and who had to get vaccinated. Those did not go forward. There was actually a bill to legalize a date rape drug and other hallucinogenic drugs. And there was a bill to reinstate the death penalty that didn't go forward, remove health screenings from schools, remove nurses and counselors from schools, didn't go forward. And the good work of the members of the Iowa House that are here. There was a tax actually to tax the sun and make it harder for people to put solar systems on their homes. That did not advance. And then another big one, vouchers for private schools, shifting money from our local public schools to private schools. That did not advance. So there's more, but I'll stop with those. One of the jobs of people in the minority are to point out problems with some of the ideas of our friends on the other side of the aisle. And I think we did a good job doing that and made it hard for some of those, what we would think are kind of bad ideas, to move forward. Thanks for being here. I look forward to your questions.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm State Senator Zach Walls. I'm a freshman state senator, just finished my first session in Des Moines. I have the honor and the challenge of succeeding Senator Bob Dvorsky, who held this seat in the Iowa Senate for 28 years. Now, I'm 27, so you can do the math. I learned a lot, and in the first session, I spent the first couple of weeks just trying to figure out like where all the rooms are and where the coffee is and how to print stuff. And after that point, I learned a couple of lessons in terms of the fact that you really can't get anything done alone. So you got to figure out how to work. Thankfully, I've got fantastic colleagues both in the Senate and across the Capitol over in the House who I was able to learn a lot from on the issues and learn in terms of actually getting things done, how the place really works. And so that was a real pleasure and something that I really enjoyed. I also learned how social this job is. I really had no idea going into it just how much time we would be spending with constituents. It usually starts at about 7 in the morning at the Capitol with 2 or 3 different groups coming in to talk about their legislative priorities over coffee and donuts and sandwiches and all kinds of food throughout the day, as you have even more meetings. And then in the evening around 4:30 or 5 o'clock, there'll be another 3 or 4 different groups, the community colleges, the rural electric co-ops, task forces on aging, that are coming in and giving us more food and drink and talking to us about their issues. And so it's really easy to put on weight, which I did over these last 4 months. But I'm looking forward to spending the interim getting back on my bike and hopefully pedaling some of that off. There are also several bills that I was excited to help support in my freshman year and was able to be a part of helping get those across the finish line. I was I'm on the Education Committee, the Agriculture Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and the Education Budget Subcommittee, where I'm the ranking member. And on the education side, I served on the committee that helped deal with equalizing some of the transportation costs for some of our rural districts. I spend a lot of money on some of those costs. My district includes Representative Jacoby's district, West Iowa City, all of Coralville, and then also all of Cedar County to the east, which is why I was a little like getting over here. We had another government officials luncheon, and then we were in single bumper to bumper traffic, single lane traffic on I-80 getting back. So I apologize for being a little late, but we were able to get some of that transportation equity dollars passed. We also extended the Save Penny sales tax, which is a really big priority for funding infrastructure in our schools. There's a compromise that was made. There was probably Democrats, if we were in charge, we would have written the bill a little bit differently, but I think all of us voted for it on final passage. I also was part of trying to get a new line item in our budget. This was in response to something that I heard here in our community, to make sure that we had more funds for adult ELL classes in our community colleges. I spoke with Kirkwood here in our area, and they told me that they had a waiting list with several hundred people on it. And given that we, have some labor shortage issues in our state, the fact that you've got people who want to learn English, who want to be in the workforce, and they don't have the opportunity to learn the literacy skills that will help them do that, I thought that was unacceptable. And so I was able to work with Republicans to get a $500,000 in the education budget of new money to go and trying to clear out that waiting list. We're going to hopefully take another bite at the apple next year, and I feel pretty good about that. So that was definitely a priority that I was able to help get across the finish line. On the agriculture side, I was on the bipartisan subcommittee that helped write the industrial hemp bill. Now, industrial hemp is not marijuana. Industrial hemp is a fiber that is used in clothing and textile products and food products. It's got a whole bunch of different uses. And in fact, the governor signed that bill into law about an hour and a half ago. So that's something that's really exciting. It's going to be really good for soil quality, really good for water quality, going to be really good for farm incomes, which are currently subject to a very volatile federal policy landscape at the moment. And so I think that's going to be good for Iowa producers. And there were also a couple bills that passed that were bad. We'll probably talk about these a little bit more, but there were some changes to the way that we nominate judges to the bench in our state that I'm really concerned about. There's a bill that basically changed how state funds are used to acquire public lands for bike trails, for water quality projects, for flood mitigation projects. And then unfortunately, there was a proposed constitutional amendment passed that will put the federal Second Amendment into the Iowa state constitution, but with an added twist called strict scrutiny. And if you're worried about this, we can talk more about it if you have some questions. But I'm really concerned about the effects that'll have on our gun safety laws in this state. And I hope that we're able to stop it next year and prevent it from going on the ballot. But I'll stop there, turn it over to Representative Nielsen. Thank you all very much for being here today, and looking forward to your questions.
Hi, I am Representative Amy Nielsen from House District 77, which is the western sliver of Johnson County. I serve on the local government, state government, and this year also was new to the Ways and Means Committee and ranking member on Commerce, which were both very educational experiences. And luckily I had Representative Jacoby right beside me to help me through both of those. I believe I'm on the tax expenditure review. So I don't know which one of us really made Todd mad, our leader, and put us together on so many things, but one of us is in trouble. I think it might be me. I enjoyed my first session as not being the new kid on the block, and certainly never engaged in hazing the new state senator by sending him on goose chases in the opposite direction of the bathrooms. We have fun.
Definitely one word for it.
We have to. Obviously priorities, everything that's already been mentioned, education, healthcare, jobs. A couple of the personal projects that I went into the session hoping to have accomplished was I was running my bill to make EMS an essential service. Again, it didn't get nearly as far this year as it did last year. And the other bill, which actually was signed by the governor just a couple days after we adjourned, was for modernization of the Notary services. So now, you don't have to go in and sit face to face with a person. You can do notarizations via video chat, and actually it's much more secure and obviously easier to access than the traditional face-to-face notarization. So I was really excited to work on that. It's one of those things that where someone from the community brings you an idea, a hole in the services or the code that we have here in Iowa, and that citizen actually happened to be my mom. So I was even more eager and hopeful to get that through and done in the 1 year, which is pretty significant. You don't usually get something past the first year it's introduced. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate your perspective. I think it's helpful for us to see how this really works in real life. And in preparation for today, I went back and looked at some of the previous footage from previous legislative wrap-up forums. And a couple years ago, the theme was some frustration. And the frustration, Zach is exempt from this question as our newest member. But the frustration was that we weren't able to really bridge that divide. And we talked about strategy and what our strategy was to be able to work with those other members. And Zach touched upon what a social game this really is, how important it is to be able to make people hear us when we speak and to be able to work together. So how is that going? Those of you who aren't brand new, who can speak with a couple years or more than a couple years experience, how's it going working with our friends across the aisle, being from very Democratic Johnson County? How is that going? Are you able to describe that?
Well, I can start, but my wife said I can't swear today. So, but actually you go in every session with an open mind, and everyone here has close relationships with people across the aisle. And sometimes those close relationships are with different people across the aisle. I think part of the problem we're seeing statewide and nationally, along with that divide, is quite frankly an arrogance. When someone has a trifecta at the state level, then less and less as each session goes by, they feel less of a need to work with the other team. Now, everyone here has gotten a bill or an amendment passed this year or in the last 2 years. I have a couple, but it also means when you're in the minority that you're willing to turn a bill over and have someone else's name on it. Now, I will say in the past, when the Democrats were in the majority in the Senate and a few years back in the House too, we had a little, in this, of course, it's my own jaded viewpoint, we worked together with other people, and if it was a good idea, then I would say, okay, Representative Gipp, I will do whatever I can to move this bill along. I didn't go through the thing of reassigning it to myself to move it along. I think we're seeing a deeper fissure because of a trifecta, and quite frankly, what you saw this year was Representative Andy McKean switch parties from Republican to Democrat because his own party has gotten so radical, so out of touch with the people back home that he decided he couldn't caucus with them anymore. So we still have our friends that we work closely with. There's a lot of things in the list of things that are done at the end of the session that you can't tell that it was one of our bills. We still work closely, but there is a faction running House Republicans right now that worries many House Republicans. And a lot of those initiatives that are running up the middle, hopefully we'll see those next year, because it's just a reminder, it's a 2-year General Assembly. So a lot of the good things that are not yet done are eligible for next year. But it also means some of the bad things that didn't get done are also still eligible for next year. So I think we're making progress with a handful on the other team, but I'm really worried with the current president that we have and the way people are treating each other, even in social situations, because after Andy McKeon switched parties, a couple members of his very own party came over to him on the House floor and swore at him and poked him in the chest and called him names. And that's what we become under Trump, is a bunch of name callers. I won't buy into that, but that's what happened on the floor to someone who just switched parties. So on that light note, we do go in every year looking to work together, and we look at those items we can. But I think one of the main things we need to do is in 2020, take back the Iowa House, have a balanced government, and then people will work together even better.
I think we saw that. I think we saw it in the House, the difference between the House and Senate this year. You know, in general, about 80% of what we do is bipartisan. It doesn't make the news. It makes the state run. It gets things done that all sorts of people want to have happen. And 20% of things we disagree on. And the makeup in the House is, what is it, 54, 40, 56, 47, 53, 47. The House had a much more moderate tempered view towards most issues this session. The Senate, it's 32 Republicans, 18 Democrats. We saw much more extreme stuff in the Senate. And I think part of it is just the dynamic of what's the next election going to bring. We should probably try and be more moderate than crazy. And so the House actually did a number of times, slowed things down, made the discussion happen. And that was good, right? But on a personal level, we, as Senator or Representative Jacoby said, we're friendly with each other. I mean, we have friends on the other side of the aisle. We see them, we talk to them, we chat it up, laugh, make jokes, kid each other, and then we go to work on an issue that we have strong opinions about. We're ready to go over the barriers and do what we need to do to win, right? And then we adjourn, and then we go out, and depending on what kind of day it's been, either you want to not be around those people, or you're with them at a reception, chatting it up again. So, I mean, I think most members do a pretty good job of separating our relationships, and we're all people trying to do a job. But there are days when we take on issues that we have just absolutely fierce disagreement on. And depending on the day, you either want to hang out with your colleagues or you don't. We had a couple of social things this year after we'd had some long debates, and it was like members are like, "Are you going to the social thing tonight? Because I don't really want to hang around with our colleagues because they just beat us and did this bad thing for Iowans." So there's a little bit of that comes in, and we ended up going to the event, but it's complicated, but at the end of the day, we're all people trying to do the best thing. They just have a lot of really bad ideas that we're forced to deal with.
Well, they do, and they don't have to give us an invitation to the conversation, which is really what we saw, I think, the last 3 years, which was incredibly surprising to me because as a freshman coming in 3 years ago, I was told, okay, well, now the campaign's over. It's time to put all of that aside and work together. And that is absolutely not what I experienced there my first 2 years, and it wasn't this past year either. We all do really get along pretty well and socially, but when it comes to fighting for what we believe is right and for doing the best thing for Iowans, there are a few things that we are starkly on opposite ends of, and we will fight them, and we're happy to do that, but we do usually kind of all let it go once we gavel out for the day. The House Democrats this year tried offering alternative plans to some of the more extreme bills and the things that were bigger priorities, offering to put the long-term services and supports for disabled or chronically sick people from Medicaid back into the state control, because as we heard on the House floor by one of our colleagues from the opposing party, you can't make any money off of people who are disabled and sick, and that's kind of the point of privatized Medicaid. So there's a lot of those conversations also that are incredibly disheartening. We offered an alternative plan to the education and the SSA funding. And I think there were a couple more. We very strategically picked our priorities that we wanted to advance and show how Democrats would do it differently, because we didn't want to go in with we're just against everything, because that's not what we are. We're not against everything. We're for a lot of things. We're just not for what they want to propose. So it's kind of was our strategy, I think.
I just wanted to identify that for the most part, and Joe has said this as well, that it's bipartisan, and that's not what you read in the paper, because that isn't what sells papers. And the papers often look in the TV and radio about the things that divide us rather than the things that unite us. And so those are the things you hear about. But when I was starting the list, I would say to you that the things we disagree on are things like guns and gun legislation, abortion, that always comes up, and they defunded Planned Parenthood again in terms of some of the grants for sex education, which to me is counterproductive in light of the fact that those programs help prevent unwanted pregnancies, and you would want those to be more readily available rather than less. So to me, some of those are somewhat confusing. Climate. We still have climate deniers in the House and Senate both, and they aren't ashamed to say it on the floor. And it's very frustrating in light of the fact that they're voting against things or for things that create more problems. We had all the flooding in western Iowa and again on the eastern side of the state, and yet some of the policies that are being promoted are things that will increase that flooding. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to us when we look at the logic behind things. They don't always connect the dots real well. Medicaid, obviously we've had issues with managed care companies and the privatization, and we want more oversight. We want those folks that are receiving the benefits of Medicaid to be able to get the services they need. We want the managed care companies to make sure they provide the funding for providers so that the providers don't go out of business. We have basic philosophical arguments about that. So there's some very real differences between the parties when it comes to things like that. Gay rights. They did a bill this year that will not allow Medicaid to pay for transgendered surgeries. Well, those are health issues, and they're public health issues that will save lives. And again, no one wishes that on anybody, but when an individual needs those services, the state should supply that and to make sure that those services are available. Voting rights. We have some fundamental differences on voting rights and making sure that everyone has the right to vote and that we make that readily accessible. So those are things that kind of divide the parties. We supported children's mental health this year. Some of us voted against the bill because we were worried about the funding, but of course we need a children's mental health system. Everyone agrees on that. It's a matter of how do we fund it and how do we pay for it. Transportation cost. Zach talked about the $19 million that will go primarily to small rural districts because they have enormous geographic regions to be able to transport their kids to get them to the schoolhouse door. And those dollars were being taken out of their general fund, which left less money for them to educate their students. So that just made sense. Democrats have been promoting that for no less than 10 years. We've had legislation to do that for the last 10 years. So we're ecstatic about the fact that we were able to get that done this year and actually help some of those small rural districts who really struggle. Medical cannabis. I'd love to have Joe talk a little bit more about that, but he's been working on that legislation probably for 15 or 20 years. Joe, how long have you been there? 23, all right, 24. Well, a long time. And so it's not that the need hasn't been there and we haven't been talking about that, but for the first time in a long time, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, we got something started. It needs to be better. It needs to be more accessible to more people. And we need those THC levels to change so that it can really benefit the people who need it. So those are things that we've been able to get bipartisan support for and get some things passed. We would do more and we would make it a much more workable bill for the people who need it. So I'm going to stop there, but there's pro and con and some things that we have worked on.
I appreciate all your perspectives on that. And I'm hearing a lot of positivity from you all. So I appreciate that. I know there are some really, like you said, workable things that we're doing that you are year after year coming back to. And we are the Task Force on Aging. So it'd be important for us to make sure, this is going to be my last question, I promise, before we turn it over to the audience. But what can we look forward to? What are you still looking forward to in the next year, and hopefully just next year, that you want to accomplish that would be solutions for our aging population? What's on the top of your to-do list for next year?
Well, we got CARE Act done, which has been a priority for a while. I'm concerned just generally that the aging network, that the community providers, we've underinvested in them. I'm really concerned as Iowa continues to age that there just are not going to be people that are going to be able to support people that want to stay at home as long as they possibly can. When I think about that, I think about smaller community-based agencies supported through the area agencies and what that network looks like and how it can be strengthened. In the area of Medicaid, I think in just the healthcare model, we've seen this massive consolidation going on across all sorts of health services. We used to have a community mental health center here. It merged with Abbey and Cedar Rapids. We still have a place here, but what we've seen is a lot of these smaller agencies being bought out by hospital systems or taken over by larger providers, and it worries me. I want to make sure that we have a strong community-based network of providers, and maybe it's kind of an old school notion, both for-profit and nonprofit. But I think that's one of my biggest concerns is that the Department of Aging in Iowa over the last decade or probably over the last 4 years, has taken about a 30% reduction in its funding. The Older Americans Act at the federal level is flat or declining. The monies that come to do that. So I think that's the top thing. And then the other, I was just reading an article about that we don't have nearly enough medical professionals trained in gerontology, in that the importance of being able to see a doctor that understands aging and understands the issues of older people and their healthcare needs, that we hardly have anybody in our medical schools getting trained to be a gerontologist. And I think there's been some studies that show that people that have gerontology healthcare do better, live longer, are happier. And so I worry that, I'm not sure how to deal with that issue exactly. We just did some more residencies for psychiatry with the universities, but we need more support. We need more people knowledgeable about the issues that seniors have in old age to keep them healthy. So those two areas, more community support, working on that, and at least maybe getting this conversation going about gerontology and the need for more training in that area.
I think that one of the things that really kind of jumped to the front of the line this year was affordable housing. And I know that in my own district, we saw, the fleecing of residents that live in the mobile home parks, having these out-of-state companies come in and buy up the parks and then jack up the rents 60 and 70%. And usually the majority of the residents are on a fixed income, whether it be Social Security or something else. And they can't afford that kind of an increase in their living or housing expense, because we're certainly not keeping up with that on the other end. So that's something that I was able to offer an amendment to try to help, decrease the impact that would have on people in the future. Of course, it was shot down. Senator Walz had an amendment to a bill. Okay, I couldn't remember. Oh, it was an amendment in the House. It was a bill in the Senate. You're right. Also, that would help address this issue, and unfortunately, it made it to the House door, but didn't get let in. So we have things that we need to continue to work on, but there's certainly some new issues that are being thrown at us that we need to be aware of and keep an eye open for. So I think that's one of the things that I hope that we can continue to work on next year.
Yeah, I'd say, I think housing's a really big issue. The mobile home parks, some of you might have read about this in the paper. There are 5 mobile home communities across the state of Iowa that were purchased by an out-of-state investment group from Utah. And they started jacking up the rent up to 70% in Waukee, just outside of Des Moines. I represent 2 mobile home communities that were acquired by this company. They were increasing the rent by about 33% in West Branch and rural Johnson County outside of Iowa City. And I knocked on a lot of doors in those areas. You're talking to, as Representative Nielsen said, older folks, a lot of people on fixed incomes who are there because it's an affordable option. And now they're kind of getting that pulled out from underneath them. And so we had a bill that made it out of the Senate 48-0 in the closing hours of the session, really the last 2-3 days. And unfortunately, it was killed by a lobbyist in the House. But my hope is that we'll be able to come back next year and actually expand the scope of what we've been working on, so it's got even more protections for people who are residing in mobile home communities. Another issue that I hear about a lot is rural nursing homes. I represent several facilities, including out in Cedar County, that were really hit by the rebasing of basically the way that they're compensated for folks who are there in long-term care situations. And this is part of a national trend that's happening across the country. This isn't just Iowa. We're trying to think strategically and long-term, what are we doing to make sure that folks who want to age in a rural community have the option to do so, is a really tough question. And to Representative Masher's point earlier, I don't think that you'll find a single Democrat who is uninterested in serving senior citizens in rural communities across the state. I wish that our Republican colleagues had the same willingness to support people in urban areas in our state. And oftentimes it feels like it's a one-way street of cooperation. And that's something that I think is really unfortunate. But fundamentally, people should have the opportunity to age in the community that they grew up in. And if that's where their family is, that's where the people, their friends, their church, their community partners are, they should have the opportunity to do that. And whether it's staying in their own home or living in a nursing home, they should have that option. So those are some things looking longer term that I think we need to be focused on. And part of that's going to require action at a federal level, but I think there are a lot of things that we can do at the state level as well.
Joe had mentioned the gerontology. Along with that, as psychiatrists and psychologists, we have a shortage of mental health professionals throughout the state, and that's for both young and old. And so identifying more of the nurse practitioners that could provide those services, or physician assistants who are specialized in mental health services. Those are the things that we should be looking at in terms of expanding upon those services for individuals, because we find a lot of times elderly get isolated and they need that interaction with others in order for them to stay healthy and to be able to stay in their homes. I know more nursing homes are now providing home health care services to help people to stay in their homes, which I think they're starting to realize that more people desire that. And in order for them to be able to continue, they need to get into that field as well, and to be able to provide more of those supports so people can stay in their homes. The rural health centers are critical. And if you look at what happens to people in rural Iowa who are elderly, they're the ones who stay most isolated because of transportation issues. Oftentimes they don't have any way to get into town, any way to access other people and to be able to socialize with others. Those are critical services, and we need to be looking at other ways to provide that transportation. I know there are some agencies within our community now that are willing to do that. And so you can contract with them and they will take people to their doctor's appointments, to get groceries, to play cards with somebody if that's what they want to do. So it's those kinds of services, again, that I think are so critical in helping keep people in our communities and to be able to keep them vibrant. So hopefully those are things we're moving in the right direction and will continue to do. Co-housing, I like the idea of the co-housing. We've got an example of that over off of Highway 1. And that particular co-housing unit is, again, a great way to keep people engaged as a part of a community, being able to do things together and provide that support. So more of those opportunities would be good as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just, I'll be brief on it because this is near and dear to me. You know, my priority is to keep people at home as long as they can be in their home. I think what we need to do a better job is realizing what it does really mean to live on a fixed budget. And how I take it personally is not only when people are at home, they're isolated, but when they're in care centers too. So one of the things I will do today is after our next economic development meeting is stop by the care center in Lindcrest or in Coralville and stop and see a neighbor friend of mine who's down in the care center because he can't be at home. As much as I talked to him throughout the year before he was in the care center, now he needs to see people even more. And how much he appreciates you stopping by for 30 minutes is off the chart. So we're talking money, we're talking health, but we're also talking one of the greatest things we can give people is a little bit of our time. And in closing, what we really need to do too is have a real ombudsman. We need an office that's fully funded at the state level, and we have to give back our attorney general the rights and the power he needs to go after anyone that's not treating the elderly the way they should.
Okay, on that note, I will go ahead and open it up. If you'd like to come up here and ask your question, you are welcome to do so. If not, I'm happy to bring the microphone to you. We have a pretty open space here. So yes. Any questions? Bob has a question. I figured he might.
First and foremost, let me thank you, because you sure represent me and my values. A couple of suggestions. Joe, you've always been very good about introducing bills from the old Iowa's legislature, as others of you. And the thing that we ran into this year, for example, you introduced a bill on elder abuse. The fact that it had all Democrats' names on it, meant that it didn't get considered. And so, you know, you all might want to adopt a procedure or strategy that says we will seek always to introduce a bill that has some Republican support and only introduce bills all of one party as a last resort. Second suggestion, and that is that you seek to change the level of conversation. For example, Dave, you and Amy mentioned about the tax review. You know, I would suggest that, you know, the conversation might be, what's the purpose of taxes? Are the tax credits really doing the purpose that they were created for? You know, a couple of years ago, I looked at the revenue tax credit. At least, unless I completely misread the history, it's not doing today what it was intended to do. And I think that maybe rather than, you know, discussing, hey, should we do this tax or that tax, you know, to go back to the basic level, and we might find some conversation, because in the time that I've been coming to the state, I had one of the people that used to be at the door of the Senate, whose son lives here in Johnson County, who I know very well. His father, who is one of the door people there, said, it is getting more and more partisan. These people used to work together. And maybe the strategy needs to be discussing at a more philosophical level rather than a policy. And we might find some agreement that we can build on. You know, for example, what is the purpose of the local government? What's the purpose of state government? You know, it gripes the heck out of me for the state to say to Johnson County, hey, you can't do a livable wage. You know, you can't do this. You can't do that. Well, you know, what is the purpose? You know, I think that it might be that discussing the purpose of things, what's the goal of things, you know, I think you all know, I'm not a great fan of the privatization of Medicaid. But, you know, maybe the question is, how can we best serve persons? I keep hearing the governor saying, and DHS, hey, we're seeking to make changes. I don't know what in the heck changes they're making or proposing, but you know, what can be done to better serve people? You know, and it might be, and I know you all have advanced this, separating out those who need long-term care. Just in thinking of this forum, it might be that if that doesn't fly, a compromise is, hey, maybe you have an MCO whose total population are those that need long-term care services. Because that standard rate doesn't go. You know, when I read the reports of the quarterly reports, it's no reason, I mean, there's no question why the first MCO left. You know, it's because they were serving a disproportionate share of persons who needed long-term care services. So I guess all I'm suggesting is that it might be that two strategies you might consider is introducing bills just as all representatives of a party as a last resort, you know. And second, that you might discuss, and this seems silly to suggest, but at a more basic level rather than a policy level. You know, like, what is the purpose of state government? What is the purpose of local government? You know, there's been times I have thought that I should go to the state and say, why in the heck don't you pass a law that says local communities and counties have no authority? All decisions will be made at the state level. But I think, you know, I think you get the point. I think we need to have discussion at a different level than what we're having now.
I did not sign it.
Perspectives. I appreciate that. Does anyone have any, I realize that was a comment, but there's some interesting thoughts that Bob brought up about really what is the purpose of our state representation? What I know some of you are newer, I'm looking at Mary, I'm looking at you, Joe, who have been around for a while. Has your perspective changed at all over the years about what your overall purpose is?
I will start, Bob, by saying one of the things that would help us a lot, when Joe puts his name on a bill, or Dave or Amy or Zach or any of us, you know, we do that because somebody at home has asked us to, or we have support for that. What would help us a great deal is if the people in those districts that are not like ours were asking their legislators to put their name on those bills too. Those older Iowa legislative priorities are not difficult. And they're ones that would be very doable, but if they don't hear from anybody back in their home district, then they don't think they need to sign on, and they don't think anybody supports it back home. And so it would help if you could build your coalitions and can basically reach out to those in other areas to help them see why that's needed and why they need to lobby their own legislators to be able to get on board with that legislation. It's great for Joe to go and approach Senator Zahn and say, would you sign on to this? And Senator Zahn looks at him like, are you out of your mind? Of course I'm not going to sign on to that. Nobody's asked me to, and I don't even know if the people in my district want that. And so if they don't have anybody asking them, then it's difficult for us to be able to ask them to sign on to something when they haven't been asked by their own people. So in order for those coalitions are critical. And that's where I want to come back to, we need your help in reaching out to others across the state in terms of your elderly priorities or just priorities on healthcare, and to say, this is what we want. They get as many emails as we do, if not more, on the problems with Medicaid. I'll be honest with you. All of them will tell us that. But when it comes to actual oversight and legislation to have that oversight, we just get this blank wall, and they won't do anything because they don't want to go against the governor. They don't want to take her on and say that, this isn't working, although they say it to her all the time, right? Not in public. And that's where we need them to be able to speak out and to say those things and to help us get things passed that way. I don't know if others have perspectives there too, but
I think there was Senator Walls spoke of this earlier. He did some phenomenal work this session on the issue of the mobile home parks and the raising of rent, and got a bill out of the Senate. He worked really closely with another member, Senator Charles Snyder, who represents Waukee, and Waukee has a mobile home park similarly affected. And so Senator Snyder had constituents, as Representative Masher points out, contacting him saying, we need your help. And Senator Walls did a fantastic job getting a bill out of the Senate that we haven't been able to pass for the entire time I've been there, to try and give people that live in mobile home parks some rights. Right now, you'd basically be kicked out of a mobile home if you look at the manager the wrong way, literally, right? So, and that's work for next year. He'll go back and work with members of the House. He's going to get an education on how to go over and work with members of the House, right? He spent a lot of time in the Senate, kind of ran out of time to develop relationships in the House. On the kind of the macro question of the role of government, right? The difference in philosophy. I mean, I think the people up here at the table think that in a democracy, we're going to have a government, and in our case, it's a government of, by, and for the people, for us. That the people in the government should be us, and we should do things for us. And the government's this tool to organize ourselves and efficiently do things, right? The other side, I think, sometimes sees government as, you just listen to the rhetoric. It's the problem. We need to make it smaller. It can't do anything right. It's always in the way, except for when there's a flood and they want people, the first calls to the government say, come help us, right? So I think there's a difference in view about the role of government. I mean, the whole Medicaid thing is we took the government operation of the Medicaid and handed it over to these private companies to run. That's kind of a philosophical view of the Republicans. Privatize it, right? The private sector is always right. The private sector can always do things more efficiently, and it's just not true. So I think trying to bridge the gap on the macro, like let's talk about the role of local government or the role of state government. I think even at that level, we would find some pretty diverse viewpoints on the power and role of the government to be a good force in people's lives.
Did you want to say that again, Bob?
I was just saying, I understand your point. But the present system, the present discussion level sure isn't working, Joe. The bipartisan, the partisanship is increasing and increasing. And I'm just suggesting maybe a different approach will help. Maybe it won't.
I think the challenge we have is, and I know this is going to sound partisan, but I read off a list of things, you know, and Representative Masher had a list on things like voting rights and gun laws and women's control of their bodies. And that there are a lot of really extreme viewpoints coming at us. On our side, the extreme viewpoints are what? Everybody should have health care. We ought to have more renewable energy and deal with climate change. Women should control their bodies. The extreme side on our side is kind of, I guess it's extreme to the other side, but, you know, everybody having access to public education, be able to go to affordable college. You know, when I think of the two agendas, I think the other side is, and this is the problem, right? Bob, you'd say this thinking pattern I'm in right now is the problem. They've got this extreme agenda, and we're left over here with these things we'd like to see for the community. And they bring these ideas to the table, and we don't get to say, we got to vote, right? These jobs would be great jobs if we never had a vote. But if they bring bills on making it impossible for us to have background checks, or restricting our ability to vote, or, you know, there's a long list of stuff here. Bringing a gun to your church. We're going to fight on those things. I don't know. I'm not sure how to get around. I'm not sure what conversation exactly gets us around them not bringing those ideas in the first place, because it's a long list of stuff.
I think what I'm hearing you say earlier, Joe, is a great reminder for us. If we have things that are important to us, we need to be speaking up. Is that what I'm hearing you say? And that is just as important as what's happening at the Capitol, because we are the voice and we're communicating our priorities to you. We need to be telling our friends and our neighbors that it's easy for us to talk amongst ourselves. If we're not communicating those ideas, those initiatives, and those priorities to our representatives, our senators, then we're probably not going to be very successful. But yes, please.
Say one more quick thing on that last piece, Bob. I'm new, right? So I'm still kind of learning how the place works. But one of the things that is already fairly clear to me is there's a lot of homogeneity to some extent ideologically within our caucus, right? So we've got a couple of more moderate, conservative-ish Democrats in our caucus, and I'm sure it's the case in the House too. Well, I mean, there used to be, right? So like, you know, in the Democratic Party used to be more moderate, more conservative. The Republican Party had some moderates, some liberals. And there's just over time, right, there's been more sorting. And so you have fewer liberal, you know, moderate Bob Ray Republicans in that party. And you have, you know, fewer, kind of more moderate Democrats in our party. And so, and like, that's probably good, right? I mean, you want people to know what they're getting ideologically when they go into the ballot, you know, they go vote, right, the ballot box. And the other thing that's happening is that increasingly you're seeing these real changes between urban and rural areas, right? Senator Kevin Kinney isn't here right now because he was in Des Moines at the industrial hemp signing, but there aren't a whole heck of a lot of folks like Kevin who are winning in rural Iowa who are Democrats, relatively speaking, than we used to. You know, I mean, Tom Harkin won what, 80 counties, right? I mean, and today that sounds like a joke. You know, and so, and part of that is because rural Iowa is changing and urban Iowa is changing. And so I think until you can tell us how we can reverse some of these bigger macro trends, some of which are good, some of which aren't good or bad, like I think the sorting is going to continue. And so, you know, ideologically, you're going to have parties that are more homogenous, which again, I think is probably good for voters. On balance, right? You want to know which party aligns with your beliefs. And on the other hand, creates what Senator Bolcom was referring to, these real frictions between those different worldviews when that manifests at the State House. And I think the thing that we have to be careful of is that as the Democratic coalition becomes more urban based, right? We have more of these suburban and urban voters who are kind of increasingly higher income, right? That our economic message remains consistent, because I think that there's going to be a lot of pressure on us from our, now new Polk County Democrat, House members, right? They got a lot of folks who are probably more economically moderate than the Democratic Party historically has been. And so how do we continue to have our strong economic message that has made Democrats the Democratic Party for as long as we've been around, while also trying to expand our electorate and actually win back control of the legislature in a way that will put us in a position to either negotiate in divided government or to roll back some of these really radical changes with the trifecta. And that's a big, if you got the answer to that, please let us know. Have me over for coffee sometime. I'd love to talk about it more.
Hi, thank you for being here and for sharing the information and experience with us. A few things I wanted to say. My name's Mercedes Byrne-Klug, and I'm a social work professor, and I also coordinate the Aging and Longevity Studies program for the University of Iowa. And on that note, I wanted to bring up, I completely agree that we need more physicians who are prepared to work with older adults, but the physician isn't the only person. And the advanced practice nurse is also very important, but it's not the only person. The majority of mental health services in this country are provided by social workers. And we need more social workers in this state who are prepared to work with older adults. We also need to do something about our direct care workers. And the thing that I would love to see is access to health care. Access to health insurance and access to health care for direct care workers, because it just doesn't seem right that somebody is taking care of our persons with disabilities and our elders day and night, but they and their own kids don't have access to health insurance. So that would be my number one priority, is find some way to get access to direct care workers, which could also help keep people in those jobs. And it's very expensive for employers. So employers may offer it, but they're with really high deductibles or really high premiums. And so they can say they offer it, but they're not actually accessible. The other point I would like to make is about this Medicaid managed care. We know for sure that they're getting paid every month for every person under their umbrella. That's all we know for sure. We don't have any data about what they're paying out, how many times they refuse to pay, how many times they send back saying, no, you need more documentation. And so it's not a level playing field, because before we would have access to that kind of information. But now that it's been farmed out to companies in other states, their answer is, oh, well, we don't have the data. That's not acceptable, because I think if it ever comes to show that they are saving money, you can save money when you don't provide care and you don't reimburse providers. And so we're losing providers across this state who are very committed, but can't pay wages on air. And so it's crucially important. And I mean, what you mentioned that you're hearing a lot from your constituents, and your Republican colleagues are hearing a lot from your constituents, but nothing's changing. So what would it take to change to get the profit motive out of providing care for our most vulnerable people in this state?
Insurance companies give hundreds of thousands of dollars to the governor's reelection campaign.
It's the sole prerogative of the executive, right? If Fred Hubble had been elected governor, even if he had had a Republican-controlled legislature, it could have been changed.
I mean, it was changed from state-run to private by a governor. It can be reversed and fixed by a governor. It is completely profit-driven. Until we change the governor's office, we're not going to see any improvements there, I don't think. I think even taking back the House in a couple of years, we can do some things to help slow it down, stop it, or, you know, maybe get a little bit of oversight put in. But until we get that change at the very top, you know, we're stuck. I mean, we completely understand what you just said. We know it. We've heard it. We get it. You know, we're preaching to the choir and you're preaching to the choir, and we all know this, but man, if we could just get more people outside of Johnson County to understand the devastation that Kim Reynolds and has continued on from Terry Branstad and is going to continue on to us, we're stuck.
Any further questions?
Very sobering. My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm the Executive Director of Access to Independence here in Iowa City that works with persons with disabilities. And I recently have been having meetings with Habitat for Humanity and Center for Worker Justice and the Johnson County Affordable Housing Coalition about the mobile home parks. And it's very timely that we're talking about this today because we've had several calls from persons with disabilities who are affected by this. And those meetings are very sobering because it feels like really there's nothing we can do right now, and that, you know, these meetings are very reactionary, that, you know, we're trying to find a network of agencies to make sure that people are getting wraparound supports and connected with who they need to be. But there's no real protections in place to stop what's going on. And so, you know, we've talked about maybe some advocacy letters, you know, trying to get together with national organizations who are facing this in other states. But, you know, I'm curious what, you know, you think we can do in the meantime, which, you know, quite frankly, I don't think there's a lot, but, you know, what can we be doing in preparation for the next legislation season to address this? Because you know, it is very sobering, and it's hard to, you know, as an agency that needs to provide answers for persons not to have any. So, thank you. Yeah.
As you just saw, but I think the only thing we can do right now is support the individuals who are being impacted, make sure that they know how to access services and be there for your neighbors who need the help or the transportation or the help reading the new lease and all of that stuff. You know, this attacks on mobile home park residents have been coming from all different directions for a while now. I mean, back, you know, 5 years ago when I was mayor in North Liberty, we were seeing issues come up in the mobile home parks there, completely different from this. And so this is, it's not a new thing. It's a different strategy, I guess. It's a new strategy, but we, you know, we need to get a lot more comprehensive protections put in place. And, you know, the Senator Walz really did a good job on his bill, and he was able to do that because he had some Republican support. You know, Senator Schneider had a constituency that was affected by this. On the House side, you know, the Waukee representative on the House side is a Democrat, and I'm a Democrat, and you know, a couple other of us that had the affected areas were also Democrats. We weren't able to find that support across the aisle. I'm hoping that next year, you know, we can be more successful in getting those things put in, because, you know, there are some pretty significant things that are completely fine and legal to do, and when you live in a mobile home community, that are not acceptable anywhere else, and it's just not right. So
People who rent apartments have more
Yeah.
rights
Yeah.
than a person in a mobile home park. That doesn't even make sense. You know what I mean? Because at least in a mobile home park, you own your own mobile home and they own the land. In an apartment, they own the apartment and the land and the building, and they have more rights. So there are things that need to be changed. And Zach, you might want to point out what the points are in your bill, because they are significant.
Yeah. So, insert what does Access to Independence do?
So, Access to Independence serves persons with disabilities in 5 core areas. We're a Center for Independent Living, which is one of 6 in the state of Iowa. We cover 8 counties. Advocacy, person-centered support, information referral to other services, transition support to both persons and institutions coming into community living, and then teenagers transitioning from like high school to post-secondary.
So look, I'm not ready to throw in the towel on the Haven Park Capitol fight yet. We know for a fact there are people who are involved in the family of these Haven Park investors who actually work in affordable housing. Like, people should be at their place of employment picketing where they work and saying, if you're going to be working in affordable housing, how in God's name can you possibly be ready to evict people from trailer courts across the country because they can't afford a 60% rent increase? I know that there are some folks who are organizing mobile home residents associations in North Liberty. I was able to look at some information from a survey about the people who are in the Gulfview trailer court. The folks who live there who are disabled, over half of them said that they are going to have to move because they can't afford the rent increase, right? I think that we're going to be back next year. The current bill that I proposed had 2 key parts that we were able to get kind of through the negotiation process in the Senate to get it out unanimously. Those 2 core provisions were, first, to extend the written notification period for a rent increase from 60 days to 180 days. And the second piece was to institute what's called a good cause requirement for eviction. As Senator Bolka mentioned, currently you can be evicted from a mobile home park for any reason or no reason at all. And what we were saying was that you have to have a good reason, just like you do if you live in an apartment, to cause an eviction. The other things that I would like to do, and that I'm planning to incorporate next year when we come back, would be to make sure that we also have that we're putting into the Iowa Consumer Fraud Act the mobile home residents and even apartment residents portion of it, because you actually need that renters piece, because a lot of folks are paying lot rent, but a lot of folks are also renting the mobile home. And so they got the double whammy. So you need both of those to be put into the Consumer Fraud Act to allow the Attorney General's office to go after bad actors. We're going to try and put that in there as well. And then second, we're also going to, there are several states, including actually the AARP, has model legislation on this that it creates what's called a right of first refusal for residents of a mobile home community. So if an outside investor is trying to acquire your mobile home park, the people who actually live there have the right to match the offer and purchase the land for themselves, to have some kind of cooperative ownership model. Now you might be thinking to yourself, oh, but how are folks who live in a trailer park going to be able to afford that? It just so happens that the state of Iowa last year created a revolving loan fund to assist with the purchase of mobile homes. And so what we want to do is take that money and make that available as part of a low 0% or 1% interest financing. As part of, you need basically a kind of a cake, or a tier, like a layer cake of financing to make that work. But we think that could be one option to help actually give residents some ownership, right, and own something that's going to appreciate in value, unlike their mobile home, which unfortunately usually depreciates in value. So those are going to be some of the core components of what we come back next year. We're going to have to work in the House. We were able to get a bill out of the Senate. I don't know if we'll be able to do that again next year. It's going to be a hard fight regardless of kind of how things go. But I really, and I'm talking with residents who are in these mobile home parks. And my advice at this point is, I understand if you just kind of want to leave and you want to get out, but I think that people should be willing to continue to fight and force these people in Utah to negotiate with them at the table. And that's something that's worked before, and I think it can work here.
I think what you're saying too is I think we're going to have to do more to help people currently. I mean, we're doing good things for the future, but what can we do for the people right now in the mobile home parks is a little bit of a struggle. I think we'll have to change the whole discussion too. It goes a little bit with Bob saying, you're here. Thank you for coming. Right now, we have 5 Democrats sitting in front of you telling our point of view. In Rockwell City, there's a forum going on with 3 Republicans who are saying 3 things. Taxes are bad. The Medicaid privatization is working really well, and fill in the blank. In other words, we have to change the discussion to go across the board. They're And why are we hurting more? Because what is the biggest Medicaid recipient county in the state? Well, it's Johnson County, because we have university hospitals. That's where the people are coming to for critical services, is Johnson County. We have to go out, or you have to go out, or our relatives have to go out, or my mother-in-law in Rockwell City have to go to the forums, and she does. And my mom and dad up in Marion, Iowa, to the forums and talk to them about what they're feeling in the communities. When I ran the B Corporation bill, it wasn't even going to come up for a subcommittee. I called 8 different counties that are totally represented by Republicans, talked to the Eco Devo, the Chamber of Commerce people, and said, what do you think of this? Corporations, profit motive with a social conscience. We like it. They called their reps. Suddenly, their reps came to me saying, can I sign on to the bill? And we'll have a subcommittee on it, which is all the farther it went. But what we need is more grassroots in the rural areas, more grassroots where our direct care workers aren't getting paid shucks, what they should be getting paid. And in some of those small communities like Rockwell City, they're other than the prison, the second biggest employer are the care centers. That's who's employing people in those areas. And people working there tend to be relatives of people there because they can't hire anyone else to come in and do it. So people are doing it part-time, partially for income, but also because my grandma's in there and no one else will work. So, or is able to work or wants to work or is in the town. So I think it's that grassroots. We have to go to the other areas and say, this is important. And it also means sometimes one of us has to go to those forums and say, Medicaid change is not working. And I'm sure everyone up here is the same story. There's not a single day that I don't take a phone call on Medicaid. And this morning I walked out of my office for 20 minutes, a phone call on Medicaid and an adult child and the services he was not receiving, and with the changeover. It's every single day there's a Medicaid thing. So it's kind of frustrating when you want to work with other people, but you're not making any headway. But anything you can do, friends and relatives that live in Sac County, Calhoun County, and Tama County, and other areas, make sure that you're advocating with them too, so that they can advocate with their reps and senators.
I appreciate all your questions. Really important information shared today. Did want to give you, we have about 3 minutes left. Want to be respectful of your time, but also give you an opportunity for a quick closing statement, maybe about 30 seconds.
Thank you so much. I just appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you, and we're available whenever you want to pick up the phone or email us or text us. So please feel free to do that. We are your representatives and we're very proud to be that, but it takes you telling us what we need to do. I was just going to comment real quickly. Early childhood educators also need the same support for healthcare, wages, benefits. Right now, we're having a real critical issue with our childcare providers because they do not receive a living wage, a decent wage, and oftentimes they make below minimum wage because there are no guidelines for them at all. So it's an issue that affects our youngest children as well as our oldest Iowans. So thank you. That's right. Yeah, connect the dots there, right? Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Again, as Mary mentioned, we love to hear from you. And I love how things have changed since I started in the legislature. The old paper mail, always made sure I got back to someone within 72 hours, a response. Phone calls, tried to respond if there's something I had to do a little homework on within that same 24 to 48 hours. Now with these, I love it. One of my favorite constituents who happens to live in my household, sent a thing, say, well, I sent you an idea and you haven't responded yet. And I said, when did you send it? 11 minutes ago. So it's a new world, but everyone here, including me, loves to hear from you, your ideas, and anything you think we can do to make Iowa better.
Thanks for coming, everybody. I want to one more time say that Zach Walls has done some really good work this session on a really important issue we've not made progress on. One person in the House that needs to hear from us is Ashley Hinson. She's a Republican representative from up in the Cedar Rapids area. I think she's going to announce to run for Congress.
She already did.
She's going to be in the General Assembly next spring, and she stood in the way of us passing this bill that Senator Walz worked so hard on. So
The mobile home bill.
the mobile home bill. So I don't know if you're up in Lynn, but we should get some pressure on Ashley to do the right thing if she wants to represent us in Congress. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah, I'll appreciate the warm words, Senator Bolcom. I appreciate all of you being here. This was a real learning experience for me these past 4 months, getting out to Des Moines and just trying to get up to speed and learn how the place works. And so I appreciate the feedback that we heard today. I really am glad to be here to have the opportunity to serve. And if you ever have any questions, please do not hesitate to send me an email or even a letter in the actual mail. You know, I like getting those too. I was happy to get mail and to write notes back too. So I've got some business cards I'm happy to leave out if you need my contact information. I know it's a little fresher than everybody else up here.
Yeah, just thank you for having me. Thanks for taking the time to be here. It's great to hear back from you, whether you're telling us stuff we completely agree with or teaching us something new that we need to learn about. It's always great to be back home and to talk to the people that send us up to Des Moines. Just a little bit, Bob, to what you were saying earlier. I know we've had the conversation a couple of times at different forums, and it really is hard to go up there and try to work with people that don't want to work with you. And as Senator Bolcom was saying, Senator Walz did a lot of work on the Senate version of the mobile home bill, and he was able to get something done on his side, but the Republicans on my side wouldn't hear about it. And so it's really hard to do things when nobody wants to work with you. And I hope that you guys recognize that we are up there doing our best. We're not fighting with people. We're not antagonizing. We're not obstructing. We're trying. But when you don't have a seat at the table, you're dinner. So thank you all for being here, and I hope to hear from you again soon.
Thank you, everyone.